What does ancient Egypt conjure in your mind? Pyramids, pharaohs, maybe a golden mask or two. But how did all of that come to be? How did a complex society rise from scattered settlements along the Nile? Welcome to Blind History with Josh Berry. Over the next few weeks, we will be diving into the history of Egypt. Along for the ride, we are joined by our resident Egyptian expert who will help us explore this wonderfully rich and fascinating history. Today we're diving deep into the early dynastic period and the Old Kingdom of Egypt, roughly from 3100 to 2181 BCE. We'll be exploring the political, social, and even environmental factors that shaped this civilization. With me is an expert in ancient history, ready to unpack it all. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. It's a period of immense change and fascinating complexity, laying the groundwork for everything we think of as classic Egypt.
So, let's set the stage. We're talking about a period of over 1,000 years. What were the key ingredients that allowed a unified Egypt to emerge?
Well, it wasn't a sudden thing. Think of it as a gradual consolidation of power. Before the dynasties, you had competing chieftains. But, over time, these evolved into larger, more complex social hierarchies. We see intensifying warfare, expanding trade, and, crucially, the development of shared symbols of authority.
Shared symbols? Like what?
Exactly. And this is where the idea of the pharaoh really takes hold. He wasn't just a political leader, he was a sacred figure, a bridge between the human realm, the gods, and the cosmic order.
So, the pharaoh wasn't just in charge, he was the embodiment of order itself.
Precisely. The Egyptians called it maat, order, balance, and justice. The pharaoh's job was to uphold maat against the forces of chaos.
That's a heavy job description.
It was. It meant performing rituals, leading military campaigns, or at least authorizing them, overseeing law, administration, and ensuring the gods got their due. The state, in essence, was a religious institution as much as a political one.
It's fascinating how deeply intertwined those two concepts were. Now, I know there's a figure, a name, often associated with the unification of Egypt. Remind me who that is.
Yes. Legend often credits a figure named Menes with unifying Egypt. Now, whether Menes was a single person, a title, or a composite figure is still debated by historians. But archaeological evidence does point to rulers like Narmer and his successors as key players in bringing Upper and Lower Egypt together.
Upper and Lower Egypt. It's always struck me as counterintuitive that Upper Egypt is in the south. Can you clarify that?
Of course, it's all about the flow of the Nile. Upper Egypt is upstream, in the higher elevations to the south, while Lower Egypt is the Nile Delta region in the north, closer to the Mediterranean.
That makes perfect sense. So, with this unified kingdom under a pharaoh, how is the state actually structured?
Imagine a pyramid, with the king at the very top. He's supported by a growing administrative system that trickles down through provincial officials all the way to village leaders. The country was divided into nomes, or districts, each with its own local traditions, but now integrated into this larger system. Think of it as a franchise model.
A franchise model for ancient Egypt. I like that. So, how did they actually manage such a large territory?
That's where the scribes come in. With the development of writing, these specialists became essential. They were the record keepers, tracking taxes, land ownership, deliveries of goods, religious dedications, everything. Writing, at this stage, was very much a tool of power.
So, writing wasn't for literature or poetry just yet?
Not primarily. It was mainly used on labels, stone monuments, seals, and ceremonial objects, closely associated with the king and his officials. It's about control and administration.
Control through record keeping. That makes sense. Let's shift gears slightly. You mentioned the pharaoh needing to maintain order. Not. How did Egypt interact with the outside world during this period?
That's a great question, because there's often this image of the Old Kingdom as being inward-looking, just focused on itself. But that's not entirely true. They maintained active contacts with neighboring regions.
What did that look like?
Egyptian expeditions ventured into Sinai to mine copper and turquoise, into the eastern desert for stone, and south along the Nile for gold, ivory, and other exotic goods. They weren't just sitting still.
So resource extraction was a big motivator.
Absolutely. But it wasn't just about resources. These interactions also served an ideological purpose. They reinforced the image of the king as the ruler of not just the two lands, Upper and Lower Egypt, but beyond.
A bit of ancient PR then?
In a way, yes. Scenes of foreigners bringing tribute to the king appear in tombs and temples. It symbolized Egypt's place at the center of a larger world. Think about it. Controlling trade routes, extracting resources, projecting power, all of that testifies to the state's internal organization and the king's prestige.
So, maintaining this image of power and control was essential for the pharaoh's legitimacy.
Absolutely. And that brings us back to maat. The pharaoh was the guarantor of order, not just within Egypt, but in relation to the world beyond.
We have a picture of a powerful, centralized kingdom, actively engaged with its neighbors. But, as the saying goes, all good things must come to an end. What led to the decline of the Old Kingdom?
Several factors seem to have converged. By the late 6th dynasty, you start seeing signs of strain within the system. One potential cause was environmental. Changes in climate and Nile flood levels may have disrupted agriculture, leading to food shortages and social unrest.
The Nile being the lifeblood of Egypt, that would have been devastating.
Exactly. And it wasn't just environmental. The concentration of wealth and power in the hands of provincial officials and temple estates likely weakened the central authority of the pharaoh.
So, a decentralization of power.
Precisely. As these local elites built more elaborate tombs and claimed grand titles, the image of the king as uniquely powerful began to erode. If local leaders start acting independently, the state's ability to mobilize labor and resources on a national scale diminishes.
I can see how that would unravel the whole system. It sounds like the seeds of its own destruction were sown within its success.
In a way, yes. Internal succession disputes, or the rise of powerful court factions, could have further destabilized the monarchy. Eventually, the centralized system that had sustained pyramid building and strong royal control simply couldn't function effectively anymore.
And what did that breakdown look like?
The Old Kingdom gave way to a period of political fragmentation and regional rule, often called the First Intermediate Period. Central control dissolved, and Egypt fractured.
So, to recap, we've covered the rise and fall of the Old Kingdom. From competing chiefdoms to a unified state under a divine pharaoh, sustained by a complex administration and active engagement with the outside world, and then the slow decline due to environmental factors and the erosion of central power. We started by talking about the importance of the pharaoh in maintaining maat, this concept of order. But that order wasn't just internal, it extended to Egypt's relationship with the world. It wasn't just about military might or resource extraction. It was also about projecting an image of power and stability.
And that image was crucial for maintaining the pharaoh's legitimacy and the stability of the entire kingdom. Think about those scenes of foreigners bringing tribute. They weren't just about the goods themselves. They were about reinforcing the idea of Egypt as the center of the world, the source of order and prosperity.
It's interesting to consider that the very things that made the Old Kingdom so successful, the centralized control, the focus on external engagement, also contributed to its downfall. The reliance on the Nile, the concentration of power, the need to maintain this image of invincibility, all of those became vulnerabilities.
Exactly. It highlights the inherent fragility of even the most impressive systems. And it reminds us that even seemingly immutable concepts like order are constantly being negotiated and redefined.
It sounds like this period offers a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked centralization and the importance of adapting to changing circumstances. Considering the information we've covered, what's a common assumption people make about ancient Egypt that this era challenges?
I think many people assume that ancient Egypt was this static, unchanging civilization focused solely on death and the afterlife. But the early dynastic period and the Old Kingdom show us a society that was constantly evolving, adapting, and actively engaged with the world around it. It was a period of immense innovation, both politically and socially. And now, please tell us, what date is this?
So, it wasn't just about building pyramids and preparing for the afterlife.
Not at all. Those were important aspects, of course, but they were part of a much larger, more dynamic picture.
And all of this circles back to our core topic, the rise and fall of the Old Kingdom in ancient Egypt. What's one key takeaway you want listeners to remember?
That the seeds of both success and decline are often sown simultaneously. The very factors that allowed Egypt to rise to such heights, centralized power, resource control, ideological projection, ultimately contributed to its vulnerability and eventual fragmentation.
A lesson that resonates even today, whether we're talking about nations, corporations, or even our own personal lives. The things that make us strong can also be our Achilles heel. So, we will wrap it up here for today, but stay tuned for more history of Egypt. The full audio article will be released this upcoming Sunday for a thorough exploration of this fascinating history. Next, we will be exploring First Intermediate Period and Middle Kingdom, circa 2181 through 1060 BC, BCE. Join us next time on Blind History with Josh Berry. I'll leave you with this. How do we strike a balance between strength and adaptability, between order and flexibility, to avoid the fate of the Old Kingdom?